The Fractured Promise. Marcus Chen had always been a man of ambition. From the moment he stepped into the world of business, he had one goal: to build an empire that would make his name legendary. He clawed his way up from nothing, his mind sharper than a blade, his instincts lethal in the boardroom. He was the kind of man people either feared or admired. There was no in-between. At 32, he had it all: power, influence, a portfolio spanning 5 continents. He was the CEO of Chen Global Holdings, a conglomerate with interests in technology, real estate, and finance. The name Marcus Chen commanded respect in every major business hub from New York to Hong Kong. But there was one thing slipping through his fingers: his family. Sophia Martinez Chen had been the love of his life, his grounding force. A professor of international economics, she was just as intelligent and ambitious as he was. They had met at Harvard, where she had challenged his cutthroat ideals in a debate about ethical capitalism. He had fallen for her fire, her passion, the way she saw the world in shades of justice and fairness, when all he saw were numbers and balance sheets. They had married in a ceremony that blended his Chinese heritage with her Latin roots, a grand celebration of love, passion, and promise. But as Marcus's empire expanded, so did the distance between them. 11:45 p.m. A missed dinner, a missed life. Marcus was seated in his corner office, 47 floors above the pulsating city below. Drowning in contracts, his mind laser-focused on an upcoming merger in Singapore. He barely registered the blinking light on his desk phone until his assistant, Chun, spoke through the intercom. "Sir, your wife is on line 1. She's called 3 times today." Marcus glanced at his Patek Philippe watch. He had promised Sophia they'd discuss the nursery tonight. Colors, furniture, baby names. The thought of their child should have filled him with excitement, but instead it felt like another obligation he had no time for. With a heavy sigh, he picked up the phone. "Sophia, I'm in the middle of something important," he said, his voice clipped. "More important than your pregnant wife." Her voice trembled slightly, and Marcus felt the weight of those words sink into him. "We can talk about it tomorrow," he offered, rubbing his temples. "The Singapore deal. There's always a deal, Marcus. Always another meeting, another contract, another reason not to be home." The silence stretched between them, thick with everything unsaid. Marcus turned toward the window, his reflection staring back at him. A man in a tailored suit, powerful and immovable, yet strangely hollow. Beside him on the desk, face down, was their wedding photo, the one Sophia had insisted he keep in his office. "I'm building this for us," he murmured, his voice softer. "For our future. For our child." "No," Sophia whispered. "You're building it for yourself, and you're losing us in the process." The line went dead. Marcus exhaled sharply, setting the phone down with controlled precision. Then, without a second thought, he straightened the fallen photo frame, only to flip it face down again. Empires weren't built on sentiment. They were built on sacrifice, and Marcus Chen had always been willing to sacrifice everything for success. A crumbling foundation. Sophia sat in the darkness of their penthouse apartment, her hands resting protectively on the slight swell of her stomach. "We'll be okay, little one," she whispered, but the words felt more like a desperate prayer than a truth. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. 3 words. "Take care." That was it. No apology. No recognition of how alone she felt. Just 2 hollow words. As she stared at the screen, something inside her broke. This wasn't how love was supposed to be. And for the first time, she allowed herself to wonder, what if Marcus was never going to change? A business deal or a family? The Singapore deal had been in the works for months. Billions in revenue, global expansion, the kind of opportunity that could make Marcus's legacy untouchable. And there was one catch. "We need you in Singapore permanently," said Mr. Zhang, the CEO of Asia Tech Global. at least for the next few years. The transition must begin immediately. This week. Marcus hesitated. Sophia's ultrasound photo was still in his wallet, unviewed, unnoticed. I have personal considerations. Personal considerations. Zhang laughed, but there was no warmth in it. Mr. Chen, do you know how many would kill for this opportunity? Your unborn child will thank you when they inherit an empire, instead of just a company. Marcus's phone buzzed. A note from his assistant. Emergency call from Sophia's doctor. His knuckles went white as he crushed the paper in his grip. Across the conference table, Zhang continued laying out figures that made his head spin. But Marcus wasn't listening anymore. Then another message from Sophia. Please, I need you. Something's wrong. Marcus's heartbeat faltered. His mind screamed at him to get up, to go to her, to be the man she needed him to be. But then Zhang leaned forward, sliding the contracts in front of him. Time waits for no one in business, Mr. Chen. Empires are built on moments like this. Marcus hesitated. Then, with practiced precision, he picked up the pen. He signed. Somewhere across the city, his wife sat in a hospital bed, her future and the future of their child. Uncertain. And Marcus Chen, for all his power, had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The aftermath of abandonment. A life-altering moment. The fluorescent lights of the hospital flickered above Sophia as she sat on the examination table, her fingers clenched into the sterile paper that crinkled beneath her. The air was thick with antiseptic and the faint, muffled voices of nurses bustling outside. She had been here for hours, alone. The doctor, Dr. Reynolds, adjusted her glasses, her brow furrowed as she studied the ultrasound screen. Her voice was gentle but firm. Mrs. Chen, there's something we need to discuss. Sophia swallowed hard. Is something wrong with the baby? Dr. Reynolds hesitated. Then she turned the screen toward Sophia, pointing to the distinct, fluttering movements. Not the baby, Sophia. The babies. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. Babies? You're carrying quadruplets. The world spun. She gripped the edges of the table, feeling like she had just been hurled into a completely different reality. 4. Not 1. Not 2. Not even 3. 4. A wave of emotion crashed over her. Shock, joy, fear. Then, almost instantly, pain. Because the only person she wanted to share this news with had chosen a business deal over their family. Marcus should have been there. He should have held her hand, should have been the first person to hear this life-changing news. Instead, she was alone, gripping a cold examination table, staring at 4 tiny, fluttering heartbeats on a screen. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away. There was no room for weakness now. Mrs. Chen, Dr. Reynolds continued, her voice taking on a more serious tone. This is a high-risk pregnancy. Carrying quadruplets puts a significant strain on your body. You'll need constant monitoring, possible bed rest, and a strong support system. Sophia let out a hollow laugh. Support system, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. That left on a plane to Singapore. The doctor placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You're strong, Sophia, but you don't have to do this alone. But wasn't she? She glanced at her phone, Marcus's name still sitting at the top of her text messages. The last thing he had sent. Take care. Not I love you. Not I'm here. Just take care. Sophia exhaled slowly and powered off her phone. From now on, she would. She would take care of herself and the 4 miracles growing inside her. With or without Marcus. A home that no longer felt like home. The penthouse was eerily quiet when Sophia returned. The large windows framed the city skyline, the lights twinkling in the distance like beacons of opportunity. This was the empire Marcus had built. It was beautiful, expensive, grand, and utterly empty. Maria, the housekeeper, rushed forward, concern etched into every wrinkle of her face. Dios mío, Senora Chen, You are pale. Are you okay? Sophia gave a tired smile. Maria, I'm having 4 babies. The older woman gasped, her hands flying to her chest. 4? Me Nina. That is a blessing. But, she hesitated. Does Mr. Chen? Sophia cut her off with a sharp shake of her head. He doesn't know. Maria's face darkened. And will you tell him? Sophia turned toward the massive glass windows, staring out at the city Marcus had chosen over their family. No, she said firmly. Not anymore. Maria was silent for a long moment before nodding, understanding more than words could convey. Then I will stay with you, Senora. Whatever you need, I am here. Sophia turned, her throat tight with emotion. Thank you, Maria. And for the first time that day, she allowed herself to cry, not just for what she had lost, but for the strength she would have to find. The distance between them. Marcus sat in his new penthouse suite in Singapore, staring out at the skyline, but for the first time in his life, the view did nothing for him. His phone buzzed on the marble table beside him, but he ignored it. It was never Sophia. She hadn't called, hadn't texted, not once since he'd left. And for reasons he couldn't quite understand, that unsettled him more than anything. Jiang entered the suite, holding a thick stack of contracts. Marcus, we need your final signature on the Hong Kong expansion. The investors are waiting. Marcus nodded, but his hand hesitated over the pen. His mind flashed back to the last conversation he'd had with Sophia. If you walk out that door, don't expect us to be waiting when you decide to return. He had walked out. And now, for the first time, he wondered if she really meant it. Marcus, Jiang's voice snapped him back to the present. Marcus exhaled sharply and signed the documents with practiced efficiency. Empires weren't built on regret. Or at least, that's what he told himself. The first warning signs. 3 months passed. Sophia threw herself into preparing for motherhood, attending doctor's appointments religiously, making lists, researching everything she could about raising multiples. But the strain was beginning to show. She woke up one morning to an unbearable tightness in her chest. Her vision blurred. A sharp pain shot through her abdomen. Panic clawed at her throat. Maria, she gasped. Maria rushed into the room, dropping the laundry basket in her hands. Dios mío. Sophia, your face is white. Sophia barely registered the words before her world tilted violently, and she collapsed onto the floor. Emergency intervention. The sirens blared as the ambulance sped through the city streets. Sophia drifted in and out of consciousness, the pain unbearable. Stay with us, Mrs. Chen, a paramedic urged. She tried to speak, but no words came. Somewhere, in the back of her mind, she thought of Marcus. Did he even know? Would he even care? She wanted to hate him, wanted to erase the ache he had left in her heart. But as darkness pulled her under, all she could think was, Marcus, I need you. Meanwhile, in Singapore, Marcus was in the middle of a high-stakes negotiation when his phone vibrated. An unknown number. He ignored it. Then another call. Then another. Annoyed, he finally stepped out of the meeting, answering with clipped impatience. Hello. A female voice, urgent and breathless, came through the line. Mr. Chen, this is Dr. Reynolds from New York General. Your wife. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. What happened? A long pause. It's serious. She's in emergency surgery. We've been trying to reach you. The room tilted. Sophia. Marcus gripped the phone so hard his knuckles went white. I'm on my way. And for the first time in years, Marcus Chen left a business deal unfinished. Because some things, he finally realized, were worth more than an empire. A father's awakening. A desperate flight. Marcus sat rigid in the private jet, his fingers clenching the armrests so tightly his knuckles turned white. The soft hum of the engines was drowned out by the pounding in his ears. He had been in control of everything his entire life. Business, deals, his future. But now he had no control. His wife, no, Sophia, was in a hospital, undergoing emergency surgery. He had no idea if she was going to survive. Every second felt like an eternity. Across from him, his assistant, Chun, hesitated before clearing his throat. "Sir, I've arranged for a car to be waiting at the airport." "The hospital." "I don't need the details," Marcus snapped, then immediately regretted it. He ran a hand over his face, exhaling sharply. "I just need to be there." Chun nodded, wisely saying nothing more. Marcus glanced at his phone for the 100th time. The last text Sophia had sent him was months ago. He had ignored it. Hospital results. Important. He had been too busy, too focused on expansion, on empire building. Now he might never hear her voice again. For the first time in years, Marcus felt something foreign and unfamiliar grip him. Fear. Real, bone-deep, suffocating fear. And buried beneath it, guilt. The weight of regret. The car barely came to a stop before Marcus threw the door open and bolted toward the hospital entrance. Marcus. He turned to see Maria, Sophia's housekeeper, rushing toward him, her face pale and tear-streaked. "Where is she?" His voice was hoarse, his body trembling. Maria clutched his arms. "Emergency surgery. The babies." She choked back a sob. She collapsed. The doctor said it was too dangerous to wait. They had to deliver early. Marcus felt his world tilt. The babies. Maria hesitated, something flickering in her eyes. "Segor." She swallowed hard. "You don't know." A chilling realization crept over him. "Know what?" Maria's voice wavered. She was carrying quadruplets. The word slammed into Marcus like a physical blow. He staggered back, gripping the nearest chair for support. "4." Maria nodded, her expression pained. Marcus's chest tightened. He had abandoned not one, but 4 children. His legs felt weak as he turned toward the ICU doors. "Where are they?" Maria pointed down the hall. Marcus swallowed hard, forcing himself to move, one foot in front of the other, even as every step felt heavier than the last. Meeting his children. The NICU was eerily quiet, the steady beep of monitors the only sound in the sterile space. Marcus's breath caught as he saw them. 4 tiny incubators. 4 impossibly small babies, each one connected to an array of wires and tubes. His heart clenched. They looked so fragile, too small, too helpless. He had missed everything. The ultrasounds, the kicks, the late-night cravings. He had missed them. A nurse approached, her expression gentle. "Mr. Chen." Marcus nodded stiffly. They were born prematurely at 28 weeks, but they're fighters. She gestured toward one of the incubators. "This is baby A. She's the strongest. She's already breathing on her own." Marcus reached out with shaking hands, pressing his palm against the glass. His daughter's tiny fingers twitched. "Baby B and baby C are stable, but they need respiratory support," the nurse continued. "Baby D." She hesitated. Marcus's stomach dropped. He's struggling. His lungs weren't fully developed. The next 24 hours will be critical. Marcus's throat tightened. He pressed his forehead against the glass, his vision blurring. "I should have been here." The nurse gave him a sympathetic look. "They know you're here now." Marcus swallowed hard, nodding. But was it enough? Would it ever be enough? A wife on the brink. Maria touched his arm. "Segor, Sophia is out of surgery." Marcus's head snapped up. "Where?" Maria led him to the ICU. The moment he saw her, his heart clenched. She was so pale, so still. The woman who had once been so full of life now looked impossibly fragile, drowning in a sea of medical equipment. "She lost a lot of blood," Maria whispered. "The doctors, they aren't sure if she'll wake up soon." Marcus sat beside her, his fingers gripping hers. "I'm sorry, Sophia," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." for leaving, for choosing ambition over her, for missing everything. He bowed his head against her hand, willing her to wake up. But she didn't, and Marcus had never felt so powerless in his life. A moment of reckoning. For the next 3 days, Marcus barely left Sophia's side. He alternated between the NICU and the ICU, splitting his time between his newborn children and the woman he had failed. The board called. The shareholders demanded answers. The Singapore deal was falling apart. Marcus didn't care. None of it mattered anymore. His assistant, Chun, arrived on the 3rd day, looking uneasy. "Sir, Jiang needs a decision. The board is meeting in 2 hours." Marcus shook his head. "I'm not leaving." Chun hesitated. "This company doesn't matter." Chun blinked. "Sir." Marcus turned to him, his expression resolute. "The only thing that matters is in that room." He nodded toward the ICU. And in the NICU. He had spent years building an empire. Now it was time to build something else. A family. Awakening. It happened in the middle of the night. A soft whisper. "Marcus." He bolted upright, his heart leaping to his throat. Sophia's eyes were open. Groggy, but open. Relief crashed over him. "I'm here." Her gaze flickered, confusion settling in. Then the memories returned. Her body stiffened. "The babies." "They're alive," Marcus rushed to say. "They're in the NICU. They're fighters, just like you." Tears welled in her eyes. Then, as she registered his presence, her expression darkened. "Why are you here?" Marcus's stomach twisted. "Because I should have never left." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Sophia exhaled, turning her gaze to the ceiling. "I don't know if I can forgive you." Marcus swallowed hard. "I know." He reached for her hand, but this time, she pulled away. "This isn't just about me, Marcus," she whispered. "It's about them. You don't just get to show up now and fix this." Her words sliced through him, but he nodded. "I'm not asking you to forgive me today, or even tomorrow." He looked her in the eyes, his voice steady. "But I'm here, and I'm not leaving again." Sophia stared at him for a long moment, searching for something in his gaze. Then, finally, she whispered, "We'll see." And for the first time in his life, Marcus Chen understood. Some things couldn't be bought. Some things had to be earned. And trust. Trust was the most valuable thing of all. The road to redemption. A father's first step. Marcus sat in the hospital chair beside Sophia's bed, his back aching from nights of restless sleep. It had been a full week since she had woken up, and in that time, their conversations had been sparse. She wasn't shutting him out entirely, but she wasn't welcoming him back into her life either. She was distant, wary, and she had every right to be. She had survived months of pregnancy alone, carried 4 lives without his support, fought for them when he had been signing contracts thousands of miles away. Marcus knew words wouldn't be enough. "You should go home," Sophia murmured without looking at him. "I don't have a home without you and the babies," Marcus said softly. She sighed, rubbing her temples. "Marcus, you can't just." Before she could finish, a soft knock at the door interrupted them. A nurse peeked inside with a small smile. "Mrs. Chen, are you ready to see your babies?" Sophia inhaled sharply, her hand flying to her stomach, as if expecting to still feel them inside her. Her lips parted slightly, her brown eyes shimmering with emotion. Marcus saw the rawness in her expression and instinctively reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "Yes," she whispered. The nurse wheeled in the first incubator. Inside, a tiny, fragile baby rested, wrapped in a soft white blanket. "This is baby A," the nurse said. "Your little girl." Sophia let out a choked sob, covering her mouth with her trembling hands. Marcus swallowed hard, stepping closer. The baby was impossibly small, her delicate fingers curled into tiny fists. His daughter. A new kind of emotion gripped him, something deeper than he had ever felt before. He had closed billion-dollar deals, had sat across from world leaders and tycoons, had built an empire with nothing but sheer force of will. But this was something else entirely. This was life. This was his life. "Would you like to hold her?" the nurse asked gently. Sophia nodded shakily. Carefully, the nurse lifted the baby, placing her in Sophia's arms. And just like that, the world faded away. Sophia stared at the tiny face, her lips quivering. "Hi, my love," she whispered, her voice breaking. The baby stirred slightly, her face crunching before relaxing into sleep. Sophia sniffled, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "She's so small," she whispered. "But she's strong," Marcus said. Sophia turned, as if just remembering he was there. Marcus hesitated, unsure if he was allowed in this moment. "Do you want to hold her?" Sophia asked softly. His breath caught. "Are you sure?" Sophia studied him for a long moment, then carefully shifted the baby toward him. Marcus took her in his arms with more caution than he had ever exercised in his life. And the moment he did, everything changed. His daughter's warmth seeped into him. Her tiny weight anchored him in a way no skyscraper or luxury jet ever could. His throat tightened as he ran a single finger over her tiny hand. "Hey, little one," he whispered. And for the first time in his life, Marcus Chen felt truly whole, earning his place. For the next 2 weeks, Marcus spent every waking moment at the hospital. He split his time between Sophia's room and an ICU, learning everything he could. How to feed them, how to change them, how to soothe their cries. He had built entire corporations from the ground up, but nothing had prepared him for this. For the sleepless nights, the panic of monitoring machines beeping in the NICU, the way Sophia would wince in pain from her still healing body. He was learning, and more importantly, he was staying. Sophia, however, remained distant. "You don't have to do this," she said one evening as he rocked baby D in his arms. "Do what?" "Pretend." Marcus frowned. "You think I'm pretending?" Sophia looked at him, exhaustion evident in her face. "I don't know what to think anymore." Marcus carefully laid his son back in the incubator before turning to face her fully. "I left," he said quietly. "I made the worst decision of my life. I thought I was building something for our future, but I was just running from what actually mattered." Sophia crossed her arms. "Marcus, I don't deserve your forgiveness yet," he admitted. "I don't even know if I ever will. But I'm here. I'm not leaving again." Sophia studied him for a long time before exhaling. "We'll see," she said. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. The offer that could destroy everything. A month later, the babies were finally stable enough to come home. Marcus had prepared everything. He had turned his penthouse into a nursery, hired the best neonatal nurses, made sure nothing was missing. But when they arrived, Sophia hesitated at the threshold. I don't know if I can stay here," she murmured. Marcus's stomach twisted. "It's your home," he said. It was. She turned to Maria. "Can you take them inside?" Maria nodded, carrying the first baby inside. Sophia took a deep breath. "Marcus, I need space." Marcus's chest tightened. "Sophia, this doesn't mean I don't want you in their lives," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But I can't just step back into this like nothing happened." Marcus nodded stiffly, feeling like he had been punched in the gut. He had been working so hard, trying so desperately to show her he was changing. But he couldn't erase the past overnight. "Take all the time you need," he said finally. Sophia gave him a small, sad smile. "Thank you." Then she stepped inside, without him. And for the first time since he had come back, Marcus felt truly alone. A choice that would define him. A week later, Marcus sat in his office, staring blankly at the view. His phone rang. It was Jen. "Marcus, we need you. The board has voted. If you don't come back, they're replacing you." Marcus closed his eyes. This was the moment he had spent his whole life working toward. The empire he had built was now his to lose. And yet, his gaze drifted to the framed picture on his desk. It was of Sophia and the babies, Olivia, Lucas, Ethan, and Emma. His true empire. Marcus inhaled deeply before answering. "Jang, I'm not coming back." Silence. Then, "Marcus, this is everything you worked for." Marcus smiled sadly. "No, it was everything I thought I wanted." And with that, Marcus Chen chose his family over his empire. For the first time in his life, he was no longer chasing power. He was chasing something far more valuable. Love. A home no longer shared. Marcus stood in front of the penthouse door long after Sophia had disappeared inside with the babies. She had asked for space. She had asked for time. And no matter how much it hurt, he had to give it to her. With a heavy exhale, he turned and walked away. Not away from his family, but away from the idea that he could fix this overnight. Learning to be a father. The following weeks were the hardest of his life. Marcus spent every day proving himself, not with grand gestures, but with consistency. He showed up at doctor's appointments, at late-night feedings, at the endless cycle of diaper changes and exhaustion that came with 4 newborns. Sophia had moved back to her old townhouse, the one they had once planned to sell before he left. It had taken him 3 days to get the courage to visit her there. When he knocked, she opened the door with dark circles under her eyes, hair in a messy bun, a baby strapped to her chest in a carrier. She stared at him for a long moment before sighing. "You can come in, but only if you're willing to take one of them." Marcus immediately extended his arms, and she handed him Olivia, their firstborn. The moment his daughter settled against him, Marcus felt the weight of the world shift. He was no longer Marcus Chen, CEO. He was Olivia's father. Lucas's, Ethan's, Emma's. And that title, it mattered more than anything. Building trust, one day at a time. Sophia still kept her walls up, but she no longer denied him access to their children. Marcus earned his place by waking up at 2 a.m. for feedings, by learning how to properly swaddle, by researching everything he had missed during the pregnancy. One night, when he was over for his usual shift, he found Sophia asleep on the couch, an open baby book beside her. She looked so exhausted. Marcus hesitated, then slowly knelt down and pulled the blanket over her. She stirred slightly but didn't wake. For a moment, he allowed himself to just look at her, this woman he had nearly lost. His heart ached with the things he wanted to say. But words meant nothing without action. So he stayed. That night, he took care of the babies alone, letting her sleep for the first time in what was probably months. When she woke up in the morning, there was fresh coffee on the table, 4 fed and changed babies, and a man who had once left, but was nowhere near leaving again. And for the first time since his return, Sophia smiled. A real, tired, genuine smile. The temptation to leave again. Marcus had made his choice. He would never put business before family again. But business wasn't ready to let him go. Jang called constantly. "Marcus, you're losing everything you built. The board is furious. You're really going to let someone else take your company." Marcus ignored most of the calls, until one night when Jang sent him the email. The subject line read, "Final offer, sign, or be removed." Marcus stared at the screen. They were pushing him out. His own company. A part of him wanted to fight, to reclaim what was his. But then he glanced across the room, where Lucas was asleep in his bassinet, his tiny chest rising and falling. This was his true legacy. Not the steel and glass of his empire, but the small, breathing miracles who needed him more than any company ever would. So he closed the laptop. He let it go. And for the first time in his life, he felt free. A hard conversation. Sophia sat across from him one evening, nursing Emma in her arms. "Are you really going to walk away from everything?" she asked softly. Marcus exhaled. I already did, he admitted. She studied him carefully. You work your whole life for that company, Marcus. And I almost lost everything else because of it. She looked away, her fingers gently stroking Emma's tiny hand. I still don't know if I can trust you, she whispered. Marcus swallowed. Then let me prove it to you. Sophia met his gaze. How? He thought for a moment, then said, by never making you ask that question again. Sophia blinked, clearly taken aback. But she didn't push him away. She didn't ask him to leave. She just sat there, staring at the man who had once shattered her world, wondering if he was truly capable of putting it back together. The first real step toward healing. One day, after another long night of tending to the babies, Sophia turned to Marcus as he placed Ethan back in his crib. You know, I didn't think you'd last this long, she admitted. Marcus turned, surprised. You thought I would leave again. Sophia sighed. I didn't know if you were strong enough to stay. Her words hit him harder than any business failure ever could. Marcus had always run. From emotions, from commitment, from real responsibility. I'm not running anymore, he said firmly. Sophia looked at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached for his hand. For the first time in months, she let him touch her. And Marcus knew he was finally earning his way back. A future unwritten. It would take time. More than just a few weeks or even months. But Marcus Chen was willing to put in the work. Not for an empire. Not for power. But for them. For her. For the family he had almost lost. And maybe, just maybe, one day, Sophia would believe in him again. Until then, he would keep showing up. Because this time, he wasn't building an empire. He was building a home. And that was everything. The fight for family. A love that couldn't be fixed overnight. Marcus had never been a patient man. He built his empire through speed, precision, and ruthless efficiency, closing deals in hours, securing investments in minutes. But this, winning Sophia back, rebuilding the trust he had shattered. There was no contract to sign, no negotiation to fast-track the process. It was going to take time. And for the first time in his life, Marcus was willing to wait, co-parenting with a wall between them. Sophia allowed Marcus to be there for the babies, but not for her. Every day, he arrived early to help with feedings, diaper changes, and doctor visits. Every night, he left when the babies were asleep. He wasn't allowed to stay over. Not yet. This arrangement is working, Sophia said one evening as she sat across from him at the kitchen table, sipping a mug of tea. Marcus looked at her. For now, he said. Sophia frowned. What does that mean? It means I'm not giving up, Sophia. His voice was steady but gentle. I'm not going to be just a part-time father, or the man who drops by and leaves. I'm here for the long haul. Sophia sighed, rubbing her temples. Marcus, I appreciate what you're doing. But that doesn't mean I can just forget what happened. I don't want you to forget. Marcus leaned forward. I just want you to see that I'm not the man I was before. Sophia studied him for a long moment. Then she whispered, We'll see. Marcus nodded. It wasn't the answer he wanted, but it was honest. And for now, that was enough. The business world won't let him go. Marcus had officially stepped down as CEO of Chen Global Holdings. The board had replaced him, and he should have felt bitter. But instead, he felt relief. For the first time in years, he wasn't spending his nights in a different time zone or missing dinner for another deal. Still, the business world hadn't forgotten him. Zhang called again one morning, this time with an offer Marcus didn't expect. There's a startup in need of investment, Zhang explained. It's a renewable energy company with a focus on developing low-cost solutions for underprivileged communities. Marcus raised an eyebrow. And why are you telling me this? Because I know you, Marcus. Zhang sighed. You still want to make an impact. You're just trying to do it differently now. Marcus hesitated. For months, he had focused only on his family. But deep down, he still had the mind of a businessman. He still wanted to build something. The only difference, this time, he wanted to build something good. "Send me the details," he said. And just like that, the next chapter of his life had begun. A moment of weakness. One particularly rough night, Sophia broke. The babies had been crying nonstop. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, and barely holding it together. Marcus had just put Lucas down when he heard the soft sound of sobbing from the kitchen. He found Sophia standing by the sink, her hands gripping the counter. Her shoulders shook with silent cries. Marcus approached carefully. "Sophia." His voice was gentle, hesitant. She didn't turn around. "I can't do this anymore." Marcus's heart clenched. "You're not doing this alone," he whispered. She let out a broken laugh. "Aren't I?" Marcus swallowed hard. "I know I made you feel that way. But I'm here now." Sophia finally turned, her eyes red-rimmed and filled with months of pain. "Do you have any idea what it was like? To go to every doctor's appointment alone. To sit in the hospital, terrified, knowing you might not make it, and realize the one person who was supposed to be there wasn't." Marcus closed his eyes, her words gutting him. "I will never forgive myself for that," he said. "But Sophia, please, let me fix this." She stared at him, her breath unsteady. Then, to his complete shock, she stepped forward and pressed her face against his chest. Marcus froze. His arms hovered for a moment before finally wrapping around her. For the first time in years, he held his wife. Sophia clung to his shirt, her body trembling. And Marcus, he held her like she was everything. Because she was. The breaking point. The progress they had made nearly fell apart 3 days later. Sophia had gone to the grocery store, leaving Marcus alone with the babies for the first time. He was prepared, or at least he thought he was. Within minutes, chaos erupted. Lucas refused his bottle. Olivia had a diaper explosion. Ethan wouldn't stop crying. Emma screamed whenever Marcus put her down. Sweat dripped down his back. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals, but this was war. When Sophia walked in, she found Marcus standing in the middle of the nursery, completely overwhelmed, his shirt covered in formula, his expression pure defeat. She paused. Then she laughed. Marcus blinked. "This is funny to you." Sophia set down the groceries, crossing her arms. "A little." Marcus groaned, rubbing his face. "How the hell do you do this every day?" Sophia smirked. "Welcome to my world." And just like that, the tension broke. Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. For the first time in a long time, they laughed together. And in that moment, Marcus saw a glimpse of hope, a step toward something more. One evening, as Marcus finished cleaning up after dinner, Sophia stood in the doorway watching him. "You didn't have to do all that," she said. Marcus shrugged. "I want to." Sophia hesitated. Then she said something that stunned him. "Would you like to stay for dinner?" Marcus looked up, shock flickering in his eyes. They had spent months co-parenting, but never once had she invited him to stay longer. It was small, but it was everything. "I'd love to," he said softly. The future they were building. Weeks turned into months. The barriers between them slowly started to fall. Marcus and Sophia weren't together again. Not yet. But something was changing. One evening, as Marcus tucked Olivia into her crib, he turned to see Sophia watching him. She had that look, the one she used to give him before everything fell apart. The look that made his heart feel whole. Marcus exhaled. "Sophia, do you think there's ever a chance for us?" She didn't answer right away. Then finally she said, "I don't know, Marcus, but I think we might be getting closer." Marcus smiled. It wasn't a promise, but it was hope. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Because the fight for his family wasn't over. It was just beginning. The road to forever. The choice that changed everything. It had been a year. 12 months since Marcus had walked away from his empire. 12 months since he had held his children for the first time. 12 months since he had vowed to win back the woman who had once been his entire world. And yet, as he stood outside Sophia's townhouse, his hands clenched at his sides, he realized that time alone wasn't enough. Sophia still hadn't let him back in completely. Yes, they co-parented. Yes, they shared the late-night feedings, the exhausted mornings, the milestones. But she still wouldn't call him her husband, and Marcus wasn't sure if she ever would again. A family that felt whole, but wasn't. Daddy. Up. Marcus barely had time to react before Olivia came running toward him, her tiny arms outstretched. He scooped her up, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You've been practicing your running, huh?" he teased. "Faster than Lucas," she declared proudly. And not. Lucas protested from the couch. Ethan and Emma sat on the floor, playing with blocks, completely unbothered by their siblings' rivalry. Marcus smiled. This was what he had fought for. This was what mattered. But as he glanced toward the kitchen, where Sophia stood making coffee, her back turned to him, he was reminded that not everything had healed yet, a conversation that couldn't be avoided. Later that evening, after the kids were asleep, Sophia lingered by the sink, rinsing out bottles. Marcus sat at the table, watching her carefully. "You've been quiet today," he finally said. Sophia sighed, shutting off the water. "I've been thinking." Marcus's stomach twisted. About what? She hesitated, gripping the edge of the counter. "About us." Marcus exhaled slowly, his heart pounding. "And?" Sophia turned around, her expression unreadable. "Marcus, I don't know if I can ever love you the way I used to." Her words hit him like a punch to the chest. Marcus clenched his jaw, nodding. "I understand." Sophia shook her head. "No, you don't." She sat down across from him, folding her hands together. "Marcus, when you left, I had to rebuild myself. I had to become someone who could survive without you. And now, I don't know if I can just go back to being the woman I was before." Marcus swallowed hard. "I don't want you to be who you were before," he said quietly. Sophia blinked. "What?" Marcus leaned forward, his voice thick with emotion. "I want you to be who you are now. The woman who raised our children on her own. The woman who didn't wait around for me to come back. The woman who's stronger than I ever deserved." Sophia's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Marcus, I love you, Sophia, not just for who you were, but for who you are. And if you don't love me anymore, I'll accept that. But I need you to tell me, do you still feel anything for me?" The room was so silent that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. Then, finally, Sophia whispered, "I don't know." A trial separation that wasn't temporary. After that night, things changed. Marcus still came by every day. He still put the kids to bed, helped with dinner, made sure Sophia had support. But there was a new distance between them. Sophia didn't invite him to stay for dinner anymore. She didn't laugh at his jokes. She didn't touch him. And Marcus, for the first time, he wondered if maybe he had already lost her. The breaking point. It happened on a quiet afternoon. The kids were playing in the living room. Sophia was folding laundry, and Marcus was fixing a broken toy at the kitchen counter. And then his phone rang. Jang. Marcus hesitated before answering. "Marcus, I know you said you're done with the business world, but I have something for you." Marcus sighed. "Jang. It's a foundation." Marcus paused. "What?" "A nonprofit, focused on funding single mothers, supporting premature births, and helping struggling families. If anyone should lead this, it's you." Marcus's grip tightened on the phone. A foundation. Not a corporation. Not a billion-dollar business. But something that actually mattered. "Send me the details," he said. And when he turned around, Sophia was watching him. A moment of truth. "Are you going back?" she asked softly. Marcus shook his head. "Not to what I was before." Sophia exhaled, closing her eyes for a moment. You really have changed, haven't you? Marcus stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. I had to. She searched his face, as if looking for something she wasn't sure she'd find. Then, before he could stop himself, he reached for her hand. And this time, for the first time in a long time, she didn't pull away. A love rebuilt, not reclaimed. Months passed. Marcus launched the foundation. Sophia supported him. They raised their children together. And then, one day, something changed. Sophia kissed him. It wasn't planned. It wasn't dramatic. They had been putting the kids to bed, and as Marcus turned to leave, she just leaned in. Soft. Hesitant. Real. Marcus froze, his breath catching. Sophia pulled back quickly, her cheeks flushed. Marcus cupped her face gently. You don't have to explain. She swallowed hard, looking into his eyes. I think I'm ready to try again. Marcus's heart clenched. Are you sure? Sophia nodded. I don't love you the way I did before. Marcus felt his chest tighten. Then she smiled. I love you in a new way. Marcus let out a shaky breath. That's all I've ever wanted. The road to forever. It took time. But this time, Marcus didn't rush. He didn't demand. He just stayed. And slowly, Sophia let him in again. One day, as they sat outside watching the kids play, Sophia leaned her head on his shoulder. Marcus stilled, hardly daring to breathe. You know, she murmured, for a long time, I thought we were over. Marcus turned his head, pressing a kiss to her hair. We were. Sophia looked up at him. Then what is this? Marcus smiled, intertwining their fingers. This, he whispered. This is us, starting again. And as their children's laughter filled the air, Marcus knew. Some things weren't meant to be rebuilt. They were meant to be reborn. And this was their second chance at forever.